To call the meeting of the City of Newcastle Planning Commission to order. Our first agenda item is a roll call. Stephen, do you mind starting and we'll do roll call? Just state your name.
Frankel. Tim Gibbs.
Tamara Stoner. Ray Rivera.
Margot Rain. Kristen Zumar.
Cynthia Batty.
And Dave Majewski.
Mayaski.
Say that again?
Mayaski.
Mayaski is not able to join us tonight, so. Okay, approval of the minutes. In your packet are the minutes from July 22nd. Are there any? There's two.
Different sets, yeah.
Thank you. The first set of minutes was for the public hearing. The second set of minutes was for the planning commission. For the public hearing, are there any changes or corrections? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve these
So
minutes?
moved.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes for the public hearing are approved. The minutes for the planning commission meeting. Do I have any corrections or changes to those? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve? A motion to approve. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Tim. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting minutes are approved. Public comment on agenda items. This is the opportunity for people in the public to come and make comments. Your comments can only be regarding items on the agenda. There was an agenda. I don't know where.
They're right there.
They're right there. If you didn't get an agenda, you're welcome to it. You have 3 minutes. If you would like to speak, no, right there. There you go. Does anybody have any public comments
Yes.
to make? Okay,
Let me preface it by
wait, what? Can you please go to
Oh,
the
sorry, I
podium
didn't see it was all the way over there.
and,
Thank you.
and state your name and address, please?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, all. First, let me open up with, according to my right to speak and freedom of speech,
Your name and address?
sorry. Philip Gross, 1301 13th Street, Newcastle 19720. Now I'll preface it by my freedom of speech and being able to speak on anything connected with the city is allowed, whether it's agenda or not.
Sir, it's not. It's for this, Mike Hoffman, counsel, planning commission. In a public meeting, you are permitted and public comment is welcome for items that are on the agenda. So if you have public comment, it needs to be directed to the items that
And
are,
what's that, where did that come from? Is that anywhere in the charter?
that's in Delaware law. It's under Freedom of Information Act.
Okay, I'll quote you and state your name again, please.
Mike Hoffman with Connolly Gallagher.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman, just so you know, my name's Phil Gross, so when I come with this issue, you'll know where it came from.
Great, thank you.
As far as public comments on agenda items, I have to question how quick this came before this board for the project down on West 7th Street. This should have come up a while ago. And the fact that I feel was stonewalled and has not been put through the usual process in the speed that it should have been, I've got to question whether if it was a religious organization that was for whites, I don't believe it would have taken this long to get approved. way too long. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Do I have any other public comments? No other public comments? This is your only opportunity to make comments during the rest of the meeting. Only the commission members are allowed to talk. Just want to make sure everybody's clear.
And applicants.
And applicants, right? Okay. So I'm closing public comments. Our next item of business is a special exception recommendation for religious institution in the downtown Gateway District. That's from Warden Taylor, covering lots 428, 430, 432, 434, 438, 440, and 442 West 7th Street. Somebody here to present this?
Madam Chair, did you want me to introduce, in terms of what type of application this was and the factors that the commissioners are to consider?
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, everyone, give me just a couple minutes, I'll tee it up. Members of the planning commission, the planning commission's role, when you sit in the capacity to hear a special exception, is to consider certain statutory factors. Your role here is to make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. It's ultimately the Board of Adjustment that is going to be tasked with applying the factors and making a determination. But before they can sit and hear the matter, they require a recommendation from the planning commission. So that's why this body is meeting here today. In formulating your recommendation, you are tasked with applying the factors in the zoning code. I will read the factors for you so that you're aware of the factors. They're very general. But just before I do that, the purpose of a special exception review is essentially considering the appropriateness of a proposed use. That use has been identified by the council as being an appropriate use, but of a type that requires a heightened level of scrutiny just to verify that it fits with the character and fits with the code. So it's a special exception as a use that's been generally determined to be appropriate in subject zoning district, but given the nature of the use and potential that it could be problematic, is subject to heightened review. The factors that you're considering in determining that it is in fact an appropriate use for the district are, and this is from the City of Newcastle zoning code, 1, generally that granting the special exception will not adversely affect public interest. 2, you're to consider the suitability of the property for the use desired to assure that the proposal is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the zoning code, the comprehensive plan, and other relevant plans. 3, that the purpose will not substantially injure or detract from the use of neighboring property or from the character of the neighborhood, and that the use of the adjacent property is adequately safeguarded. 4, that the proposal will serve the best interests of the city, the convenience of the community, and the benefit of the public welfare. 5, you're to consider the effect of the proposal upon the public services and facilities such as public water, sewer, police and fire protection, and public schools. 6, you're to consider the probable effect upon highway traffic and pedestrian movements and assure adequate access and circulation arrangements in order to protect major roads from undue congestion and hazards. 7, you're to be guided by sound standards of subdivision and land development practice where applicable. And last, 8, you may prescribe conditions and safeguards in addition to those otherwise required by the city code as are necessary to assure that the intent of the zoning code is complied with, which conditions may include but are not limited to harmonious design of buildings, planting, and its maintenance as a sight and sound screen, the minimizing of noxious, offensive, or hazardous elements, and adequate standards of parking, loading, and sanitation. So again, just to summarize all of that, and again, you are making a recommendation to the board. The board is actually going to be applying those factors. But in evaluating this, the question is the use proposed appropriate in light of the intent and spirit of the zoning code and those items that I mentioned?
May I just say that it would have been really helpful to have a sheet, like we talked about before the meeting, included in our package, that was the criteria, so we could have a chance to think about that. So going forward, if we could.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Give us a little bit more information like that, because I mean, from the very beginning of my being on here, I ask every time, what's my job here? 'Cause it's not always clear, so that would be extremely helpful.
Sure.
And then, is there any other context that you wanted to set, or are we gonna just listen to the?
No, that's the charge. And so the applicant will make a presentation, present their position and in terms of in favor. You're allowed to ask questions of staff, to the applicant, and again, work towards making that recommendation.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Ryan Jorlin, counsel for St. Matthew's Church. Also here is Dr. Smith, lead pastor of the church. Just wanted to clarify what we're applying for today. So it is just the special exception for use as a church and its ancillary uses. We have provided a preliminary concept plan for the church, outlining the size of the building at 6,700 square feet, the parking proposed. And at this time, just want to apply for that, and also the distance variance, at least a recommendation for the Board of Adjustment for a variance of the requirement of the walking distance from off-street parking.
Mr. Jorlin, if I can just interject on that one, because that actually is an important piece of context for the commission to know. So the commission is sitting today to make a recommendation on the special exception, not the not the variance. So it's a little bit of an oddity in terms of what Mr. Jorlin was mentioning. He's thought they are applying for a variance from the city code for the distance requirement for parking. It's not in the commission's purview as to whether that variance should or shouldn't be granted. The purposes of your discussion analysis, you are assuming that's what they are presenting, and you're assuming that's the facts under which this is being presented. So you're not going to make a recommendation on the variance. You are making a recommendation on the special exception. A little nuanced, but I think it's important to keep in mind.
So yes, today I'm happy to answer any questions about the proposed project. I can provide an overview of details. It's proposed to be generally a church, also to have ancillary uses for the community. So different church groups, different care for children while church service is going on. It's not necessarily going to be used as a commercial daycare. It will just be for care for the church patrons. Also, just want to outline that this is, we believe, within the character of the DG district. This church is meant to be very walkable. It's across the street from a bus stop. There is adequate parking when you combine the on-site parking and the off-site parking at Harvest Academy. So Dr. Smith is associated with Harvest Academy. We provided the city basically a consent, a letter from the head of Harvest Academy allowing the church during not during school hours, to use the parking during services. So the use of the off-site parking will primarily be during the weekend while school is not in session. So as I said, during this time, we've provided just a preliminary site plan. The church understands that more detailed plans will need to be provided. They're working with Landmark Engineering, who drafted the preliminary plan. They're also working with CPR Construction and plan to comply with any requirements as far as, building above the floodplain. I know it has to be built 10 feet above. And they're happy to comply with those once they get to that stage and they're approved to be a church. So happy to take any questions at this time.
I have a question. Thank you for that. I went out and looked at the space today, and it would be great to have something nice there. So that's promising. You said you use language around the daycare, not necessarily a daycare. And of course, taking care of babies during a church service is one thing, but I think in the letter that the city administrator Tantilla wrote to you, it said if the property cannot be considered for ancillary uses, that is nursery school or other school classrooms. Of course, you're gonna have Sunday school, everybody gets that.
Right.
But I just want to be sure that we're not being asked to make a variance that would allow an ongoing daycare or an ongoing school to be held there. And of course, because it's connected to Harvest, obviously that's where you're gonna do school, right? So I get that, but I just wanted to make sure that we crossed all the Ts and dotted all the Is here.
Right, and we appreciate the question. So yes, I've clarified with Dr. Smith. It will be just for use during church services, basically Sunday school, essentially just watching children while their parents and family members are in service.
Well, it takes a while.
Yeah.
I have one question. I understand according to the documents, this is supposed to be a one-story building,
Yes.
but when I look at the second page that has some floor plan from east wing, it shows stairs that go up and down, so it's like a basement as well, or?
Yes, so again, discussing with Dr. Smith, I clarified that as well. So that is primarily to go to a basement. This earlier interior diagram was done at the time when a second floor was considered. What is being proposed now is just a 6,700 square foot, single floor building.
Okay.
So those interior plans, I would say that east wing picture would generally be, as you can see, where nursery,
Right.
different, again, I hesitate to say daycare, but just people watching the children during the
Right.
church service will be.
So the sanctuary will be in the middle and then the two wings.
Exactly, those two other drawings basically attach on the sides of the sanctuary.
Gotcha.
You know, we just approved a property across the street and they went through all kinds of stuff around drainage and all that kind of stuff. And that's a matter of public record. You should go look at that, save yourself some effort. So I think your property is slightly higher than that one, but they've had to go through a lot on that one.
And I did discuss that with the church. They are aware of the planning and engineering that we're going with that and the cost.
Especially a basement, you know, your engineers will tell you, but it's sitting right on a wetland, edge of a wetland. So.
I don't think a basement would be permitted in the floodplain.
Yeah.
Below the basement.
And I believe that it's not required by the church either.
Right.
I don't think you're
Yeah.
suggesting a basement.
Have there been any considerations to the traffic impact? That is already, especially from May to October now usually, a highly traveled area for beach traffic. And if 95 gets backed up or it's just, it's already highly impacted. It's one lane each way. I don't know if there's sidewalks in that area. Yeah.
There are.
There are, okay. And then possibility of crosswalk to the bus stop.
There needs to be some traffic stuff.
Yeah, I believe there is a crosswalk there. There is also the, if I'm not mistaken, it connects to the Markel Trail. And it continues on to the offsite parking on Delaware Street, Harvest Academy. So we believe it's very walkable. Again, most of the patrons, a good portion of them will just be walking to service. Again, being in line with DG. So we believe that's another reason why it would have a very large impact.
But I mean, what about vehicle traffic? And what type of, is it like a 7-day-a-week type of thing where there's services in the evenings, just weekends? You know, Bible study usually occurs during the week, in the evenings when people are available. The impact of that area is already, the number of projects that are proposed along that street in general is a big concern for me.
So my understanding is, like I was saying, it's primarily for weekend service. So 2 days on the weekend, And there is a evening Bible study, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on Wednesday, that is already planned. There's other adult, a men's sort of reentry program, a women's program. Those are primarily in line with the already scheduled times, so Wednesday and the weekends.
Chris? No questions to me. When's it appropriate to ask for a traffic study? Is it later on at a site plan?
We've asked for, or we've recommended traffic studies before a special exception gets to the Board of Adjustment. But to be honest, those were much more intense uses that had traditional traffic impacts during the traditional peak times. Peak times for the scope of a normal traffic study under DelDOT standards. I don't think, well, it's up to you, but I'm not recommending that they need a traffic study in this situation, given the the size of the church and the amount of traffic that it would generate, but and especially
Well, I guess my concern is the other church, which I'm assuming is much larger over by the farmer's market, where they have to have police come out and direct traffic.
Oh,
to-
that Seeds of Greatness or something?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm sure, I
this
mean,
is not a Seeds of Greatness.
I'm just saying, that's weekend use and they have.
I think a
come
lot
out.
more than 6,700 square feet.
Yeah.
I have no concept of
It's
space,
giant.
please.
It's giant.
I just see it from the road.
how
That's a good
many
question, though.
Uh,
seats?
Exactly. So the church sanctuary is proposed to be 150 seats. So again, 6,700 square feet for the whole building. So the actual sanctuary will be, a fraction of that, probably less than half.
And what's the purpose of the west wing?
The
Just
west
an open
wing
space.
is more of the, the open, I'd say, multi-use space. So that would be for things like community meetings, different groups, adult men's groups, women's groups. Sort of, say there's a feast during a specific celebration that can be held in there. So
And-
traditional church use is not going to be rented out to, say, third parties as like a banquet space. It's not a plan for that.
And the shuttles would be going back and forth for those types of events as well?
Correct. So there are two shuttles. I'd say they're paratransit style buses, accessible, both owned by the church. So those are, always on call from the church.
I never knew that you needed to have one parking space for every 5 seats in a church, so I guess everybody's thought of everything, right? But that would require 30 parking places, and that means you're 17 short here.
Yes, so that,
Yeah.
right,
That's
yeah,
a
at
very-
least we attempted to address
Yeah.
that with the offsite.
I realize that's not for us to solve, but still, it was interesting.
Sorry. Do they own the school?
So my understanding is Dr. Smith is a teacher, an administrator at the school. I'm not aware of the ownership of Harvest Academy. I know there are people associated with both institutions.
I'd just be concerned about, and I'll tell you upfront, so maybe you could address that at that time. If the relationship should be discontinued between the school and the church, should there be an issue with parking at that time or shuttle service to parking? That would be my concern.
Can I answer?
Yes.
Yes.
Glad to.
Yes.
I pastor a church, but the dearest of friends, who is also a pastor, is the owner of Harvest Academy. We interfellowship on a regular basis. The friendship has been in numerous amount of years, so it's not like it's a new thing. I don't know whether that will be a necessity 20 years down the line. I can't say that to you. But for the rest of the time that God's allowed me to be on the face of this earth, I'm sure that that will be okay with him. I don't think you will find that there's any difficulty with that at all. And right next door to it, just so you know, there's a public parking. And it holds somewhere around 42 spaces, just so you know. So they're both in the same general proximity. We happen to be able to use up to that same amount on the parking facility Harvest. If at any time we needed more than that, it's down the street, which is what, 5 seconds away from it. So I don't think parking will be an issue.
So let me just ask again, what we're supposed to pass judgment on is the special exception for the use of a religious institution and their ancillary uses as a special exception. And that's not including a full-time daycare or teaching thing. So it's just, can they put a church there? That's our question.
That's right. Yeah, that's great.
Is there any zoning reason why we wouldn't?
Well, Mike went over the criteria. So I tried to, lay out I referenced the same criteria that Mike went over in my item number 2 in the letter. If you look at the comprehensive plan regarding the DG zone, it has the same language as the preamble to the DG zone. But I think it's worth reading or looking at in total.
Your letter is not in here.
No, it was with
It
the
was
first,
sent to you.
it was
It
in
was
the
not
Word
printed.
version of the email, I think.
Yeah, it just didn't make it to
Let's
the.
go over it.
Yes.
And Chris, maybe it makes sense, the general, you asked the question of, is there a zoning reason? The answer to that generally, and then it probably makes sense just to summarize your letter to the commission, since you have it. So generally is exactly the reason what you all were talking about before, which is when you say a church is permitted, a church could be a mega church, a church could be a small church. So from a zoning perspective, remember, special exceptions are an acknowledgement that the use is permitted, but there may be a situation, a circumstance where it's not. And so you can come to mind, for example, if it's a mega church, does a mega church, what impact does that have?
Right.
That's the zoning reason why that would be a special exception, generally speaking. But Chris underwent the staff analysis, so we'll summarize that.
Yeah, the applicant, we already went over this, is asking for a special exception per section 230-21-1B2 of the zoning ordinance, asking for a special exception for a religious institution and their ancillary uses in the DG zone, which has to be approved by the Board of Adjustment upon a recommendation by the Planning Commission. Mike went over the criteria for all special exceptions that the Board of Adjustment has to consider. If the special exception is approved, a full site plan would need to be submitted back here to the Planning Commission, where we would go over the specific site issues regarding drainage and any other conditions, stormwater management, DelDOT entrance plans. And it's the normal site plan process that you've seen other applicants go through. And as part of that process, we would ensure that approval from all other applicable agencies are granted prior to the city council approving the site plan. Given the fact that this building straddles several parcels as part of the site plan process, they would need to submit a subdivision plan that combines the parcels. We saw that with the battery, that there is a it's sort of secondary to the site plan. It's an easy subdivision plan when you're eliminating lot lines, but it has to be done. I had a comment number 5, and it's just more for the applicant, that the subject application is going to be subject to the various, the site plan, if approved, if the special exception is approved, the site plan would be subject to all of the various design guidelines and other requirements of the DG zone.
Yes.
It should be noted that the subject parcels are located in 100-year floodplain, base flood elevation of 10 feet. Any subsequent site plans and building permits would need to provide consistency with the floodplain regulations of the city. I I asked that the applicant prepare to discuss the nature of the supplemental information submitted with the special exception, which I believe Mr. Jordan's already done. And last, regarding how this area is designated in the comprehensive plan, which I always think is an important function of the planning commission in its role in making a recommendation regarding special exceptions. The subject parcels are designated as mixed use on map 3, suggested land use in the 2019 comprehensive plan. The mixed use future land use is coincides with the DG zone when it came down to zoning. The mixed use classification corresponds to the extent of the DG zoning district. In addition, the description of the mixed use classification in the comp plan corresponds to the intent of the DG zone as described in the zoning ordinance. So as such, in considering the subject application's consistency with the comp plan, the planning commission can refer to section 230-21-1A of the ordinance or page 41 of the comp plan. And just to facilitate, this is from the comp plan, but it's also the same language that's in the zoning ordinance. The downtown gateway district is intended to create a pedestrian-oriented neighborhood commercial district, providing primarily local goods and services and presenting a gateway worthy of the city of Newcastle, extend the built form, character, and scale of the historic district, encourage lively, human-scaled gathering places for community through building design and orientation, and by encouraging a mix of uses, encouraging consolidation of parcels and identified for redevelopment, reduce the number of existing or future driveways, and produce more efficient access by encouraging shared use of parking areas, minimize the aesthetic and safety impacts of parking structures and surface parking lots, and enhance the aesthetic appearance of the district, and improve the pedestrian environment along the streets, parking lots, and other pedestrian areas. Permitted uses include a variety of commercial uses, residential dwelling types. So that's the intent of the DG zone, and I would suggest that you consider the application in light of the not only the specific criteria that Mike went over, but also the overall intent of the DG zone.
Which sounds like make life better for people. Put it in just a few words, right? I have a question about the section referred to in part 1 that we're supposed to decide on. I just looked into it and it seemed to speak specifically about parking. So section 230-21.1 B2 is specifically about where parking is placed on a parcel and how it has to be screened and things like that. So I'm not really sure what we're deciding relative to that. So help me.
Sure. So again, to keep in mind, for purposes of this discussion, you have to essentially assume that the variance is not a problem. In other words, that they can meet their offsite parking requirement through the variance. However, when you're conducting your review, you still look at things such as, is the parking properly screened? Is there anything about this application that would raise a concern to the immediate neighbors and to this use on this property? That's essentially what you're.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm from listening to what's going on so far. Actually, I would agree with what you're saying so far, and I think that the focus on the parking, I think that's kind of out of context, in the sense that when you consider the other churches that already exist in historic Newcastle, with the exception of St. Peter's, no church, I think, meets this 1 to 5. So I think that really doesn't really matter. I mean, the AME church doesn't have parking at all. Emmanuel doesn't have parking at all, and I attend Emmanuel. Presbyterian Church doesn't have parking. The only two that have are the Methodist Church and St. Peter's. And St. Peter's is the only one that actually meets that requirement. So I really think that's really making a mountain out of a molehill, really, with regards to that concern. I think the overall benefit of permitting the structure going down Seventh Street, having a church there, having a church building and the activity will only be a positive impact on the environment versus having a deserted vacant lot there, so.
Absolutely agree. Good point, Stephen. The only difference is that there's no parking on the street here. So they have to have some overflow, but I think you,
But they've already identified that they have, the Harvest Academy and they have the parking lot next to the walking trail. So I think, like I said, with the exception of St. Peter's, no church in Newcastle meets that requirement, so that really should even be like an issue as far as I'm concerned.
I just got confused because the citation of the code in the thing we're supposed to decide is specifically about parking, and you told us it's not about parking, so I'm just trying to understand.
What section's about parking?
It's in Antonina's letter.
Yeah, Antonina's letter, yeah.
So,
Because we don't have yours, but
I just want to state that those churches were probably built prior to the parking requirement ever being put in place. Those are quite old and, historic area churches that have been in the community.
some before cars.
Yes,
Hard to believe, isn't it?
so, that's the only thing I would say about the other churches.
I just want to know, I'm sorry, but for my letter, it's just to state that that is their application for the variance that the Board of
Ah,
Adjustment will hear.
okay.
Mhm.
And again, it's not that you can't consider parking, it's just for the sake of your discussion, you are assuming the variance is not an issue.
I think this checks all the boxes in a positive way of the factors that we're supposed to consider. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the only thing that I could see that maybe to address it a little bit more with in regards to what we need for the DG district, is I don't see a sidewalk along the front. I just see a sidewalk down to the main building itself. There's no walking, it doesn't appear to be, at least on the plan here, a sidewalk along the street side.
there is
I
one
think there's
now.
already one on the,
There is one now. I walked down it
Yeah,
Okay.
last week.
I was there
Because it wasn't
today.
designated on the map here, so I wasn't sure if that was included in the plans or not.
Don't get rid of the sidewalk.
I just want to make sure that, you know, because walking paths and things like that are important to the
especially on
town.
that high traffic area.
And if there are people like, the gentleman said that are gonna be walking to the church, from the local area, I just want to make sure that there is
Sidewalks.
sidewalks and things that are accessible.
Yeah, I've driven past the location several times, yeah, I think we're fine.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Mayor, you're good?
Yes.
Anybody else good?
Are we supposed to decide on elimination of lot lines or any of that kind of stuff?
No, we're just the variance.
Because I'm just trying to figure out how the motion would get written, so.
So I think basically we are looking at a motion to recommend approval that a religious institution be allowed at those 428, 430, 432, 434, 438, 440, 442 West Seventh Street. Is that all I need?
That's right, recommend approval of the special exception as requested.
Do we want to put in there, subject to site plan approvals and, compliance with downtown?
No,
I don't
areas?
think we need to.
It's a matter of law, that already is.
Right.
Okay, so I'm making a motion that we approve as per,
I'll second,
recommend approval.
I'll second.
And I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried.
Step one, there's a step 75.
Okay, our next order of business is the reconsideration of the recommendation on ordinance 548. Mike, can you kind of walk us through, and you guys are welcome to leave or you're welcome to stay. Whatever.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Mr. Dorland. We'll be in touch to schedule the Board of Adjustment. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Mike, can you walk us through the thought process of why, of how that ordinance came about?
Certainly. So I understand there were some questions. I understand there was some discussion. So I'll try to add some more context in terms of how we got to this draft. Certainly happy to answer any other questions. So the issue arose, I think there was at least one project, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, if not two. There was at least one where the developer, it was a multifamily project, the developer took all the land that they needed for their project and then subdivided off the wetlands into its own parcel. The challenge with doing that is that what will typically happen is you will have the project, which becomes its own self-sustaining property on a separate parcel from the wetlands under separate ownership, sometimes in an LLC that may over time go defunct. So now you've got a wetlands parcel which by law is required to be maintained by that LLC, which now no longer exists. And so that creates a potential problem for the city down the line in terms of the maintenance of those wetlands. So that is a loophole that this is intended to help close. Now, this is where you start to get into the question of what's the best practice in terms of doing that. Well, the goal is to discourage the creation of unusable lots by requiring that lots be created to be usable in some form. So 100% covered, a lot what's 100% covered with wetlands is not going to be usable. There's not necessarily going to be value or an incentive to hold that by any particular property owner, and that's what creates the problem. So what this is aimed to do is to create a requirement that when you create a lot, it has to have some usable purpose. Well, now the question becomes, where is that usable purpose? 100% is a problem, but if you go down to 50%, and we're only talking about wetlands, if you go down to 50% or 40%,
50% of what?
50% of the area of the lot. So the question is that when you have a piece of land and you are subdividing that land, when you create that new lot, the area of that lot has to have a minimum percentage of non-wetlands area. That's what this is aimed at addressing. So it is aimed at a very specific question and a very specific issue, and that is the wetlands piece, and not carving off and creating wetlands parcels. So where that line is, we ultimately landed in discussing with staff at setting that at 80%, because when you set it, if there is 20% of a lot that is not covered by wetlands, that is most likely going to be usable. And again, if you've got a big lot, 20% can be a large area, but even on a small lot, 20% can still be a usable area.
So
when
can
you-
I ask a question about that?
Thank you.
Is there a minimum lot size in the city?
Yes,
There is,
And
yes.
what is that?
it's all based on the zoning district. So.
And what is the smallest lot size you can have regardless of district?
Okay.
So while Chris is looking at that, and we'll come back to it, the other piece that is in this ordinance is the lot frontage. So this idea that that when you create a lot, the lot has to have a minimum amount of lot frontage. And so that prevents you from just in the middle of nowhere having a lot. So it's a tandem approach. It's in order to subdivide property, your subdivided lot has to have lot frontage, and it cannot be covered by more than 80% of its area in wetlands. That was the thought process. And again, it's aimed at that very specific issue that the city did encounter, where people were orphaning off their wetlands parcels just to get rid of that obligation.
Well, so we have a real example that we approved, so it's now in the past and it's grandfathered in, but was that 80% wetlands and 20% usable land? And then I have a follow-up question.
No, the one that was actually the example was 100, I mean, it was all wetlands, right?
No, there is some upland on the orphan parcel associated with the battery. I don't have the plan in front of me, but there was some upland area there.
Okay, so then the second question is that that was right around the time that Chief Mayuski came to be part of our group. Mayuski, tell me it again. Majewski came to be part of our group. And so there was a discussion about getting emergency vehicles down to the back. We came to find out after this had all been approved that it probably should have been a paved road on the parcel that was parceled off, that's part of the apartment building. Instead, it's gonna be gravel. Wouldn't it, I mean, this is what I thought when I read this, wouldn't it make more sense to make them keep the access on their own property and maintain it as a road than to just, let it be a dirt road or whatever? And the other thing that the chief was concerned about was, you say 25 feet at the street, but once it gets narrower, you can't get an apparatus down an 8-foot road. So this was silent on the problem of what happens after 25 feet, because it could be 25 feet here, it'd go in and then down, and it wouldn't actually solve the problem. And so this ordinance is written, didn't solve either of those problems.
So I'll answer the questions in 3 parts, so bear with me. I think the first part is that as far as the dirt road, paved road or whatnot, that's a different issue. Doesn't mean it's not relevant, doesn't mean it's not worth talking about, but of course that's a different issue than what this was aimed to draft. The second thing I'll say is that a little bit of my background. I've been representing municipalities. I started my career representing municipalities. That was about 15 years ago, almost 15 years ago. I was a House attorney for the Delaware House of Representatives, so I've drafted legislation for the General Assembly. My point in that is the process of legislation is you start with a question, and then you have discussion, and it morphs and it goes. So sometimes your first draft, sometimes your solution isn't going to be the be all end all solution. That's why there's a process. And so what I can tell you is what this was aimed at addressing, and that's the context that I gave. If in your discussions you have other context, other things, then you have to weigh, is now the time to do it? Or do we want to do that in a follow-up? Or how do you, that's for you all to discuss, right? So in the terms of the 25 feet, you do have minimum lot sizes, you do have setbacks, you do have other pieces that help create the size of the lot. You also have, when you create, there's a difference between existing, what we call unique lots, just because over history they've been created that way, and when you're creating a lot, how that is set up. I mention that because through that process, when you have a subdivision that goes through, somebody trying to create a panhandle lot is going to get pushback from the city, and there's going to be that iterative process. Doesn't mean it's not worth addressing. Doesn't mean it's not worth.
So,
But my point is that's when we are going through these questions. What this ordinance was aimed at addressing is making sure every lot has access, direct access, and is not 100% wetlands.
Chris, did you get a lot size?
Yes. The smallest lot size permitted in the city is in the R3 zone for a 1-family attached dwelling at 2,000 square feet. That's a townhouse lot. Next is a 1-family semi-detached dwelling. That's 2 dwellings attached at a common lot line at 3,000 square feet.
But is
So-
there?
So at the smallest point, you have to be able to build something that has a footprint of 400 square feet.
But not quite. And so the follow-up question is there a minimum? So that's the minimum lot size, but is there a minimum lot area? And here's my point. You may be able to have a townhome lot that size, but you're not gonna have one townhome, right? So if you're creating a lot that's gonna be a townhome, then it's gonna have to be a larger size.
So a single family, what's the minimum lot size for that?
You mean detached?
Detached dwelling.
one family detached in the R3 is 6,000 square feet.
Could this create an unintended consequence that people would fill in wetlands in order to meet this requirement?
So if, no, you can't just fill it, you're gonna then be subject by the wetlands regulations. So you can't just on your own, if it is a wetlands, if it is, and that's what this addresses, you would be subject to other regulations that would protect.
My understanding is that people have filled in wetlands even if they were told not to
Yes.
within the city.
Yes.
And that's a
I think
completely
that was
different,
Riverbend.
it's a completely different issue.
You can get permits to fill in wetlands.
But
It's
they
not-
did not.
I know, but that's, the point is that you can get permits to fill in wetlands. It's not easy. They make you mitigate under certain circumstances, but it's not out of the question to get a Corps of Engineers permit, or a state of Delaware permit, and or a state of Delaware permit to fill in wetlands. Just have to go through the appropriate process. And if we see a plan here that is dependent upon wetlands being filled, you know, the list of requirements that we always condition plans on, that would be one of them. We would want to see that they have a wetland permit in hand in order to be able to build on the lot. If they show filling of a wetland on the plan that you approve, we would want to see that permit in hand before we sign the final record plan. Just like a DELDOT permit or a soil conservation permit for stormwater, those kind of things.
And just to kind of close the loop on one more with the context in terms of what this was aimed at doing. Again, it comes back to if you have wherever you draw that line, if you draw that line at a point where you are minimizing the scenario where that lot would not have any value, then you're going to promote it actually being used. And so you try to put that line where even if it's not a perfect situation in all situations, what it will do is it will help close or reduce the loophole. Because when you subdivide it, if there's value in that lot, then whoever owns that it creates an incentive for them just to abandon it because it has value. It has value, you want to get that value. That's the concept.
So as we know, wetlands are not in a box.
Sure.
They go this way and here and there and everywhere. But there's no way to make that 20%.
In one place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no way to regulate that or to legislate that. So you can still make an unusable wetlands even with the 20%. And I'm gonna go back to my original question. Where did the 80-20% come from? Because when asked, I couldn't get an answer. It's arbitrary is what I was told. I just was curious about how the figure came about, how it was used.
Sure, and you have to draw the line somewhere. And so you do the best you can to kind of sit down and identify the line at a place which will advance the objective. Even if, to your point, you can still have these questions, right? So it's no different than, you know, why do we set the minimum lot widths at 25 feet as opposed to 20 feet? Or you do it because you look at it and you say, well, we know that this is the standard size and this is a consistent size, and you kind of pull on this information to get there. 80% was selected because we knew 100% is a problem. 99% is a problem, 95% is a problem, right? But if you go so far down to, if you say every lot, you know, 50%, well, that could be a problem on the other side, because if you've got a really big property, 50% can be too onerous. So 80% was at a level where 20% in most situations is going to accomplish the goal with the access of providing a lot, arguably providing a lot that has value.
Had some value, but
Right.
that would only be in that, what bothered me, and this was what I thought about in our last meeting, was without a minimum continuous footage size of that 20 feet, which is not specified in here. You could have it be 2 feet wide and 100 feet long, and you'd hit your goal, and all you could do is build a fence, you know?
Right.
So that was a concern. The other one for me was, the purpose of the minimum lot frontage. If what you're doing is creating a panhandle so that you get access to the thing, to the space in the back, you don't need 25 feet. That was certainly not the case in the
Battery.
thing that we just approved,
The battery.
the battery one, yeah. So it strikes me as arbitrarily large for the problem that you're trying to solve, which is, you know, as the chief said, how big does it have to be to get a pumper truck through there?
My question is, with all the minimums and things like that, we wouldn't see, like, if they wanted to come with some weird plan, like Cynthia's saying, where they're, you know, making it smaller in one specific area for the frontage or something. We would see that on the site plan, correct? And so we could call that out on the site plan if the site plan comes to us and looks like it's not meeting what certain requirements that we think for safety reasons.
Correct.
Like, so by approving this, we're not necessarily mitigating any issues down the road, because I mean, I think it would be addressed more in the site plan review than this. Like, this is just setting some guidelines to move forward with the site plans. And then once they actually submit the site plans, then we'll run into the hurdles of, is it oddly shaped? Is it an actual building that is usable? Is it frontage that is consistent throughout? You know, that type of
But
thing.
can you decline somebody who wants to split their lot up because they're 20% of
Well,
non-wet?
if their site
Hold on.
plans don't meet certain requirements,
Hold on.
yeah.
If they just went to divide their lots and they just say, I'm dividing my lots, and I'm giving, because my sister and I own it, and I'm giving half to her and half to me. This is her half, and her 20% is this little skinny thing down there.
Well, she
There's
mentioned
no
the
site plan because they're not building on it.
Yeah.
There's no improvement. So what stops us from, what stops them? I mean, that's legally, they can do that. They can say, well, you're telling
This
me
language is
20%.
written, doesn't solve the problem you say you wanna solve, that's
I
the problem,
just-
we keep going around in circles on this. So-
It's not 20% buildable land, it's not 20% improvable land, it's just 20%. It's kind of arbitrary, and it can be here and here and here, and there's a piece over here, but then it gets wetlands, and then there's a piece over here. That's my concern, is since it's not some type of qualifier as to the idea of improving the land, whether it's a playground or whatever, I don't care, but it has to be a usable space that we're qualifying in this.
The subdivision that you just mentioned would come before you. And they would have to demonstrate that they are creating buildable lots.
Yeah, but we didn't make them do that.
This isn't the only thing that you look at, you know, the subdivision regulations are, it's something that we don't deal with a lot because we don't see a lot of subdivisions. We have seen, the few subdivisions that we've seen have been a couple lots here and there. But you saw that they had to show houses on them. They had to show the water and sewer connection. They had to show the building setbacks. So when you create lots, in your example, that subdivision plan would have to come before the planning
But what if you
commission.
don't have any plans for the land?
But yeah, this doesn't
It
solve the
doesn't matter.
wetlands problem.
I'm asking the question.
You have to show that the lots that you are subdividing are buildable. And we didn't do that here because it was sort of an accessory lot to a site plan that was all wetlands. But if you came in with a pure subdivision in your example, and the purpose of the plan was to subdivide, and that was it, you would have to demonstrate that those lots were buildable, that they met the minimum lot size, that there's room on there for a dwelling, that there's,
But even then, that's not called out here, this is just very vague.
but this isn't the only
Okay,
thing
but
that you look
But
at.
it's not the only thing you're considering when you're like
There's
actually
other,
getting
what
a
he's
site plan
saying
in
is
front of
there's
you.
other regulations that require
You're gonna be looking at not
buildable.
multiple like ordinances and requirements by the city to meet certain things.
This is just an additional requirement. I understand that.
This is
But
putting
then
it,
why didn't that come into play when we subdivided and had that wetlands?
Morgan.
Oh, Stephen, go ahead.
Yes, actually, I understand, okay, from hearing this ongoing discussion, I'm understanding of the point that you're, I forgot your name, sir.
It's Mike.
That Mike is making and that our city planner is making. Like I said, basically, the whole idea is trying to close the loophole that prevents individuals from circumventing it and, you know, having a plot of wetland in the middle of nowhere that they're no longer required to maintain or take care of. In terms of the other concerns that are being expressed, this isn't the only ordinance that applies. This is just one of many they have to go through. So there's other checks and balances along the way that will come into play to make sure that whatever the concerns are, they're being addressed, if not by ordinance 548, they'll be addressed in some fashion by other ordinances, but they all have to come into play. So this is not the end all be all.
I think we know that, but we just went through one of these and this isn't, it
As a
wasn't
result
how it
of
worked
what-
out.
Yeah,
and-
why didn't, I guess the question is, why didn't any of those other ordinances prevent that
From
wetlands
happening.
from
Because
happening?
we didn't have like something like this in place. So I,
But they're
Well,
saying that
they're
this
saying
is,
other ones exist.
yeah, they're saying other things exist that require you to have buildable.
In addition to this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it-
so
it
why
didn't
didn't
apply
that-
Because maybe it should have. The creation of that orphan parcel was a byproduct of the site plan. It wasn't, the purpose of that plan was not to subdivide, to create buildable lots.
No, it was to get rid of it. That
No,
was what they wanted to do.
it was a funding problem. Those wetlands
Yeah.
created a funding problem for the builders.
You know, is it,
So it was not a site plan problem, or anything. They purposely did that so they could get their financing through to build
I
this
understand.
place. So
And we
I
did
don't
make them
understand
put
why
it right
something
away.
else didn't prevent us from moving forward on that. I
Well,
guess
but
that's my
also,
question.
We put a right of way on their property. We made them build a
Yes.
right of way, right?
yes,
So that problem was solved in that case by logical thinking about we needed to get access. So we made them do that as a group. So,
Well, that only addressed the access. It didn't address the fact that it was
By the
owned by an LLC that could become defunct in some point, and then there was nobody to maintain it.
And if I
it
can,
still could.
if I can make a suggestion, I think the other part to kind of consider as you go through and evaluate this is again, this is offered to solve the question. As you're going along, if you have others, you say, all right, I'm there, but it would make more sense if we modified it to say that 20% is contiguous in some way. That's the purpose of this, right? So your choice as a planning commission is to look at it and say, all right, we have these questions, these suggestions, or no, that's not the time. We're just gonna do the lot frontage right now and let the other one be. Or you say it's not perfect and we're gonna do it right now and then come back and tweak it. That is what you have the opportunity through your discussions to do. But the ordinance is a starting point based on the question that is presented. And so I do actually think if it be the will of the planning commission, that a revision that says 20% that is contiguous in some fashion, and we can talk about
Improvable, is
that.
that the right word? Improvable land? That you can improve upon it? Whether it, I mean, it doesn't have to be buildable, because a park isn't really a building. But it has to be improvable as far as not. I don't know, is that the right term?
Usable?
Not something people would abandon, I think is what
Yeah.
we're trying to say.
Well, but
I don't
do
think it needs to be buildable, but is there a better word?
Yeah, and we can talk about that, where, so again, your point is that 20% is one thing, but if it's 20% all around the perimeter, then are you really, I think it's a good point. So I think that makes sense. If the commission says, all right, let's take a look at this, then we can come back to the commission with an update. The commission says, all right, we understand, but let's address the big loophole and then we'll come back and do it later. You can do that.
Yeah.
But again, you have options. That's the point of this discussion.
I just want to make two statements. One is that, this is an ordinance that can at some point be edited later. So if we come upon a situation that we think could cause issue with this ordinance as it is currently written, we can always edit it later.
But that might be too late.
I will also say that the longer we take to approve this ordinance, there are more people that can make it through that loophole. And
agree with
we
that.
could end up with more orphan properties in the meantime as we haggle out the 20%, 80% and things like that.
I don't think it's
So-
the percentage, I just think to me, it's
Gotta be
usable land,
Yeah.
that's all.
So then you can recommend that.
That's right.
That's what
Make a
I would
motion to say
recommend,
that.
it should state usable land. Margo, I didn't think we had an issue with the 25.
We didn't.
but, so I don't think.
Well, I just pulled that.
I'm just saying, I think we had recommended that portion go through originally, and then I see there are edits to that as well. Just striking some qualifiers, it looks like, in the ordinance, but to me, it has to state some way that has to be feasible.
And to Antonina's point, that you're making a recommendation to council, so that you could do that, say, we recommend approval, subject to the addition of some sort of, make the 20% usable contiguous in some way. And then council takes that, and they can look at the ordinance and staff can work on a modification, and that's the recommendation that's in front of
My only concern, if we use the word contiguous, if it's a really big property, if they can't do, detached homes contiguously, depending on
You're
how
having
they
more
lay
than
them
one lot,
out.
if you're not putting detached homes on one lot, you're gonna have to divide all them up.
Oh, that's
They're all
definitely
gonna
a
have to
board
have their own
adjustment
lots,
too, if
each
it's
house.
unclear.
Yeah.
Well, it depends, unless you're putting rental property, then you're not gonna need that.
But there may be some issue, I think, with larger properties for them to be contiguous. That's my.
Right, if you could have 10% over here, 10% over there.
Can you put a minimum square footage? Based on the minimum,
Of a house.
based on a single family detached house, you would have to have a minimum of 1,200 square foot. Non-wetlands, that's the minimum you can have based on that 6,000 square foot lot, you said 20%.
What if it was that the
No one's gonna buy a
minimum
house.
aggregate amount of usable area is at least 20%? So then that would allow, if it's in the aggregate area of
Total area.
usable land, right, is at least 20%.
I think that makes more sense.
Oh,
So-
that sounds good. Aggregate area at least 20%.
Yep.
Are you good with that?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Sure, the aggregate usable area is at least 20%.
Okay, that's better.
I like that.
I still have a question about the minimum lot frontage. I don't understand why it has to be so big. I'm sorry, I just don't. If it's a driveway, why does it have to be so big? Most driveways are not that big. What's the minimum for a pumper truck?
So the frontage is the amount of the lot.
It's the size of the lot, not the driveway. It's the total area.
In front of your house?
I understand, but the point that the chief raises, you could have a shadow front and then skinny it up in the back. You
Well,
know,
that's,
didn't actually
that's
solve
when you would
it.
see the site plan and we
That's
would
when
see
the
that
site plan
there would
comes in,
be
yeah.
possible issues in the site plan with the sizing of it.
Yeah, that's
That would be happening at the subdivision, not at the site plan. I'm just making that point. So that would be a subdivision issue.
But we would still review that and say, yes, we can approve this, or no, we can't approve
No,
it
because
because
there's
of this.
no access.
Yeah, it's one of those, again, I don't wanna use the term arbitrary, I got in trouble last time by saying 80-20 was arbitrary, but in my experience, 25 feet is the standard width for a panhandle lot. It happens to be the frontage. I've seen definitions for panhandle lots. It's more in suburban geography, a larger geography, a county, where you see the creation of panhandle lots where developers are subdividing in a funky way because they have to go to the back of a parcel to get where the percolation is for a septic system. You usually don't see, panhandle lots in an urban environment because there's water and sewer. You don't have to do funky configurations. It's much more uniform in the creation of lots when you have water and sewer. But in the cases where there does have to be a panhandle lot created in an urban environment, 25 feet is what I've seen over the years as the standard width.
And people could always appeal for a variance from the Board of Adjustment.
Sure, correct.
I guess I could accept that. I think we're gonna use this like 2 times in the next 20 years.
Sure.
So,
It's gonna come up with something important,
Which-
wait and see.
yeah, well, we'll see. We've only ever seen it once, so.
So we don't wanna see it again? Okay. So we need to make a recommendation that we wanna change it from just being a flat 80-20 to the aggregate usable area will be at least 20%.
Do you want me to do this one?
Be my guest.
Okay, I'd like to recommend that ordinance 548. With the 25% lot footage as written,
25 foot.
25 foot. I'm sorry,
Just, you
25,
can just say the minimum lot frontage.
min lot
that's
frontage
in-
stated.
They're all different.
and changes already made. We recommend those. We recommend the wetlands portion of 80% wetlands, 20% not wetlands. Be qualified with the 20% aggregate.
So we want to change that to the aggregate usable area is at least 20%.
Can
As
I make a
opposed,
recommendation just
Please,
for,
please.
so I would, the motion would be to recommend approval of the ordinance as presented with the revision to incorporate, apply the 20% to the, aggregate usable area, in that the aggregate usable area must be at least 20%.
Yes, that's what I said.
So moved.
Have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. PAC report?
Yeah, just a couple things. We've done some work on the documents we discussed last time for new homeowners and people like that. We're still gonna have another workshop before we're ready to turn them loose for others to review.
And this is for new homeowners of historical.
It's new, existing, it's people who sell houses, it's for
Within
businesses.
the historical-
Historic districts.
Okay.
This is PAC.
Yeah, I know, I just.
Boring old PAC, 500 people. It's not very much, but yes, it's that. But there'd been interest in this commission on that. We have a special meeting on Thursday for 4 items, which had not made it onto the agenda and were pretty urgent. So we're having an extra meeting, this week on Thursday. If any of you have nothing else to do and like to come. And I think there'd been some discussion here about the, building on Third Street, having been built without having all of the windows and things on
That
it.
was never discussed here.
You sure?
Yep.
Okay, well, in any case, I think it's worthy of note that the builder was made to reconform to the approved design, which I think is an important position for the Historic Area Commission and for the city at large, that we have rules and standards and they were enforced and that building will be updated. So that is my total report.
Okay.
Anything else for the good of the call? And do I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all.